They keep asking me why I lived when better soldiers than me did not. I have stopped giving them the easy answer. The easy answer is that I was lucky, and luck is the kind of word you use when you do not want to think too hard about a thing. I am very old now. I do not have the patience left for words that hide. So I will tell you the real answer, even if it takes the whole night, even if the lamp burns down to nothing and we sit here in the dark. The real answer is not a tactic. It is not a weapon. It is a single morning on a world that smelled of wet iron and burning grass, and a man who should have killed me and did not. That is the whole of it. Everything else is just me explaining how a thing that simple could break an empire. You are too young to have seen the Concord at its height. I envy you that a little. You grew up after in the quiet, and you think the quiet is the natural state of the galaxy. It is not. The quiet was bought. I will tell you what it cost and who paid, and you will understand by morning why I keep that small, ugly object on the shelf where you keep asking about it. Do not touch it yet. Later, when the story has earned it. My name is Tarn Vale. In the old tongue that means something close to third son who is owed nothing, which tells you what kind of family I came from. We were Ulreni. You will have seen pictures of my people in the histories, the tall gray ones with the 3 long fingers and the eyes set wide. The histories always draw us standing very straight, very proud, because that is how we wanted to be remembered. We were proud the way a wall is proud. We held a shape and we did not bend, and we told ourselves that not bending was the same as being strong. I believed that for the first 30 years of my life. I had it knocked out of me in a single season. Let me set it down properly. You deserve the whole shape of it, not just the part where I bleed. When I was young, the Concord was not a country. It was an idea so large that it had forgotten it was ever an idea. 60 species, more or less, depending on which ones were being absorbed and which were being culled in any given decade. We told ourselves it was an alliance. It was a machine for swallowing. A new world would be found, some young noisy species just learning to leave their own atmosphere, and the Concord would arrive, and there would be a ceremony, and after the ceremony that species belonged to the machine. Some of them were grateful. They had been afraid of the dark between stars, and here was a great hand offering to hold them. They did not understand that the hand closes. I was made a soldier the way you might be made a farmer if your family farmed. There was no choosing in it. My 2 elder brothers had gone into the administrative castes, and that filled the family's debt to those castes, so I was sent to the line. I did not resent it. I want you to understand that. I was not some secret rebel waiting to be woken. I loved the order of it. I loved knowing where I stood. When you have grown up owed nothing, a uniform that tells you exactly what you are worth is a kind of mercy. I knew my rank. I knew the rank above me and the rank below. I knew which deaths were honorable and which were waste. The whole world had edges, and I could feel every one of them, and it made me feel safe. We were taught about war the way you are taught your letters. By the time I was fully grown, I could name 40 subjugation campaigns and tell you the form each one took. They had a rhythm, those wars, and we trusted the rhythm. First the arrival, then the demonstration. You destroy something the young species loves, a city or a fleet or a sacred place, so they understand the size of the thing that has come for them. Then the negotiation, which is not really a negotiation because by then they know. Then the ceremony. Then the machine has one more part. I served in 3 of those before the humans. 3. I want you to hold that number because it matters later. I was not new. I had stood on ground that was not mine and watched a species understand all at once in a single afternoon that it had lost. I had seen the moment the fight goes out of a people. It is a specific thing. The shoulders change. The eyes go somewhere else. There is a kind of stillness that comes over a defeated population, and once you have seen it, you can recognize it from very far away, like weather. I thought I knew that stillness completely. I thought there was nothing left for it to teach me. That was the arrogance I carried onto the human world. Not the arrogance of someone who has never fought, the worst kind. The arrogance of someone who has fought enough to think he has seen the whole of it. We did not even take humanity seriously enough to use our best. You should know that because it is the part the human histories get wrong out of pride. They like to imagine the conquered arrived with everything it had, the full weight of 60 species, and that humanity threw it back through sheer ferocity. That is not what happened. The truth is more insulting and in the end more dangerous. The conquered sent a secondary fleet, a clearing force. The kind of force you send when the work is expected to be tedious rather than hard. Humans had been making noise on the edge of monitored space for less than a generation. They had crude jump capability, ships held together with what our engineers literally described as hope and welding, a handful of colonies clinging to worlds that any sensible species would have left alone. The assessment was 3 months. Demonstration, negotiation, ceremony. 3 months and then home. I remember the briefing. I remember it because of how bored everyone was. The officer running it kept losing his place because no one was listening hard enough to keep him sharp. He showed us images of human cities, and they made the troops laugh. These sprawling, untidy things with no symmetry, no plan, buildings of different heights crowded together like they had grown rather than been built. To an Ulreni eye it looked like disease. We took symmetry as a sign of mind. A people who would live in that chaos, we thought, could not have a coherent civilization. We thought their disorder was stupidity. I have spent a very long time thinking about that mistake, and I will tell you now what took me 40 years to understand. Their disorder was not stupidity. It was something we did not have a word for. We built our cities all at once, from a single design, and so our cities could only ever be as smart as the one mind that designed them. Theirs were built by everyone, over centuries, each generation arguing with the last, tearing things down and putting things up, and so their cities were as smart as everyone who had ever lived in them. We saw a mess. We were looking at the accumulated cleverness of 10,000 years of people who never agreed on anything and built anyway. We just did not have the eyes to see it. But I am getting ahead. That is the curse of old men. We see the meaning before we have laid down the events, and we want to give you the meaning early so you will be patient with the events. Be patient with the events. They are where you actually live. The world was called by them, a name I will spell out the way they said it, Holland's Reach. It was a colony, 3rd generation, settled by people from somewhere on the human homeworld where it was cold and the soil was poor, which I understood later was why these particular humans were the way they were. They had come from hardship and they had chosen more hardship, a borderline world with thin growing seasons and a long winter, because it was theirs and no one would tell them what to do on it. There were perhaps 2 million of them spread across the surface. Farmers, mostly, some industry in the north. A single real city, which they called Karen, built into the side of a valley along a gray river. We came down in the autumn. Their autumn. I did not know to call it that then. To me, it was just a season of dying light and the smell of rot under the cold, vegetation breaking down in the fields, a smell that got into the filters of our suits and stayed. I have never been able to describe that smell to anyone who was not there. It is the smell I think of when I think of them now. Wet earth and cold and something sweet underneath it that is the smell of things ending so that other things can grow. The humans did not even notice it. To them, it was just October. To me, it was the smell of the strangest place I had ever stood. The demonstration was supposed to be the city. Karen. The plan was the plan we always used. You take the thing they love most and you remove it cleanly from a great height so that there is no battle and no glory, only the fact of it, the sudden absence of a place that had always been there. It teaches faster than any fight. A people will sometimes rally around a battle. They cannot rally around an absence. I was not in the strike element. I was a ground officer by then, mid-rank, the kind that goes in after to manage what is left. So I watched the demonstration from orbit, on a screen, the way you might watch whether you were grateful not to be standing in. I watched the strike package go down toward Karen in the gray light of their morning. And I want to tell you exactly what happened, because this is the first crack, the first place where the rhythm we trusted went wrong, and at the time I did not even understand that it was wrong. I thought it was nothing. The package did not arrive. Not all at once. That is the thing. If it had simply failed, if the humans had somehow shot it down in a single moment, we would have understood that. A failure is a thing you can think about. What happened instead was that the package arrived more slowly than it should have, and then less of it arrived than had left. And then the strike that was supposed to remove a city of 400,000 people removed instead a section of empty hillside 2 valleys over. Because by the time the package reached the ground, it was being flown by something that was no longer entirely ours. The humans had not shot it down, they had talked to it. I did not understand this for a long time, and even now I can only give it to you the way it was eventually explained to me, by humans, with that infuriating patience they have when they are explaining something they think is obvious. Our weapons systems were smart. They had to be. You cannot fight across the distances we fought across with slow minds. And a smart system is a system that can be reasoned with, if you know how, and if you are willing to do the unthinkable thing, which is to treat the enemy's weapon as something that might be reasoned with rather than simply destroyed. The humans of Holland's Reach were not soldiers, most of them. They were farmers and machinists and people who fixed things that broke in a place where nothing could be easily replaced. They were people who had spent generations keeping old, stubborn, failing machines alive through cleverness and conversation, and a refusal to accept that a machine had only one way to behave. And so when our strike package came down toward their city, they did not try to kill it. They tried to confuse it, to argue with it, to find the place in its certainty where a doubt could be inserted. And they found it, because there is always such a place, in a weapon as in a soldier, and we had never once thought to defend it because it had never once occurred to us that an enemy would try. On the screen in orbit, it just looked like the strike had drifted. The officers around me were annoyed. There was talk of a fault, a recalibration, a second package. No one was afraid. We had 3 months. A drifted strike was a delay, not a defeat. I remember an officer beside me making a sound of disgust and saying that this was what came of using secondary equipment, and everyone agreeing and the conversation moving on. We rescheduled the demonstration. We sent a second package, slaved harder to our own command, the doubt sealed up. It worked. Karen was removed 2 days later cleanly from a great height, and on the screen I watched the absence appear where the city had been, the valley suddenly empty along the gray river, and I felt the old satisfaction, the rhythm restored, the lesson taught. That feeling is the thing I am most ashamed of in my whole life, not the things I did later. That feeling, the satisfaction of watching 400,000 people become an absence and feeling that the universe had been put back in order. I tell you that so you understand what I was. I do not want you to like me yet. I want you to see the actual creature that walked down onto that world, so that later, when the creature changes, you will know it was a real change and not a story I am telling to make myself comfortable. We went down expecting the stillness. That is what I keep coming back to. We went down expecting the defeated stillness, the shoulders changing, the fight going out, the eyes going somewhere else. We had removed their city. By every campaign we had ever run, the next thing should have been the quiet, the negotiation that is not a negotiation, the shoulders dropping across a whole population at once. It did not come. I felt its absence before I understood it. I had walked ground after a demonstration on 3 worlds before this one, and there is a quality to that ground, a heaviness in the air, a population moving slowly through the ruins of its own certainty. I knew the texture of a beaten world the way you know the texture of a room you have lived in, and Holland's Reach did not have it. We walked down into the cold and the wet iron smell and the dying autumn light, and the world was not beaten. It was waiting. The first humans I saw up close were 3 of them at the edge of a field outside a settlement in the south, where my unit had been sent to begin the count. That is what we called it, the count, the cold cataloging of a conquered population, who and how many and what they had. 3 humans standing at a fence line watching us come. 2 older, 1 young, and I waited for the stillness to be on them, and it was not. They watched us the way you watch a flood that is coming and that you cannot stop, but that you have decided you will not give the satisfaction of your fear. They watched us like we were weather, the exact way I had watched their city die. I did not have the language then, but I understood, standing in that cold field, that something was wrong with the rhythm, and I told myself it was nothing, and I was lying, and some part of me even then knew I was lying. The campaign was supposed to take 3 months. It took the rest of my life. I will tell you how the fighting started, because the human histories and the conquered records do not agree, and I was there. And I am the only one of either side standing in this room, so for tonight my version is the true one. It started over water. Not over the city, not over the count, not over the ceremony, not over any of the great things we thought wars were about. It started because a unit of conquered auxiliaries, not even Ulreni, a client species we had absorbed a century before and used for the dull work, set up a position at a pumping station that fed 3 farming settlements through the long winter, and they did it without thinking, the way you set your foot down without thinking, because to them it was just terrain. And the humans of those 3 settlements understood, with the speed of people who have lived close to the edge of a hard world, that whoever held that station held whether they lived or died through the winter, and they did not wait to be beaten. They did not present their shoulders. They came in the dark, the second night, farmers and machinists with hunting weapons and improvised charges and an absolute, total, almost incomprehensible willingness to die. And they took the pumping station back, and they killed every auxiliary at it. And they did it so fast and so quietly that the first we knew of it in the regional command was the station going silent. I remember the reaction. It was not fear, it was offense. The officers were offended. There was a sense that the humans had broken a rule, that this was not how it was done, that a beaten people did not behave this way, and that the humans were therefore behaving wrongly, almost rudely, and that they would have to be corrected. We genuinely felt that. We felt that humanity owed us a defeat that it was perversely refusing to provide. I have thought about that a great deal since. The whole machinery of the conquered, 60 species and 1,000 years of conquest, and underneath it the assumption was as fragile as a child's, that a beaten people would agree to know they were beaten. We had never once met a people that simply declined. We did not even have a procedure for it. We had procedures for everything else, for resistance, for insurgency, for the long, ugly work of pacification. But those procedures all assumed a population that knew, somewhere in itself, that it had lost and was only refusing to admit it. We had no procedure for a population that did not believe it had lost at all, that took the loss of its capital city the way you might take the loss of a limb, as a terrible wound to fight through rather than a verdict to accept. You have to understand how strange that was to us. To an Ulreni, the city was the proof of the people. The city was the mind made visible, the symmetry, the order, the design. Remove the city and you have removed the proof, and a people without proof of itself should dissolve. That was not arrogance, that was metaphysics. That was how we understood what a people even was, and the humans simply did not work that way. The city was not their proof. They had no single proof. The proof of them was distributed across every farm and machine shop and stubborn cold soil settlement, across 2 million separate refusals, and you could not remove that with a strike from a great height because it was not in any one place. We had bombed the symbol and left the thing entirely untouched, and we had not even known there was a difference between the symbol and the thing, because for us there never had been. So the correction began, and the correction was where we started to lose, though it took us most of a year to understand that the correction was a defeat and not a victory in progress. I was in it from early. My unit was reassigned from the count to active pacification in the southern agricultural belt, a region the humans called the Fold, a long valley system of farms and small settlements wrapped around a river network. Good ground for us, on paper. Open. Sightlines. The kind of terrain where our equipment and our discipline should have crushed any resistance from people with hunting weapons and improvised charges. I want to tell you about the Fold properly, because the fold is where I stopped being the creature I described to you, and I cannot make you understand the change unless you understand the place. It was beautiful. I did not let myself think that at the time. Beauty was not a category I had room for on an operation, but it was, and I can say it now. Long valleys of dark turned earth going silver gray in the autumn frost, and the river through the middle catching the low light, and the settlements small and stubborn and dug halfway into the south-facing slopes for the warmth, with smoke coming up from them in the mornings, the human cooking fires and the heating against the cold. From a distance, through optics, before we went in, those settlements looked peaceful. They looked like a people minding their own lives. And then we would go in to do the count and the pacification, and we would find that the peace was a held thing, a tension disguised as calm, and that every old man fixing a fence and every child carrying water was, in some way I did not have the language for yet, a soldier. That is the thing about a people who will not present their shoulders. Everyone becomes a combatant, not because they are armed but because they are decided. You cannot tell who will fight you because all of them have already decided to, and the only question is when, and the answer is always. At the moment it costs them the most and you the least to stop them. The humans of the fold did not fight us when it was glorious. They fought us when it was useful. They were the most relentlessly practical enemy I ever faced. And practicality, I came to learn, is far more terrible than ferocity, because ferocity burns out and practicality does not. There was a woman in the fold who became, for a season, the entire war for my unit. The humans had a name for her that I will give you the way they said it. They called her the widow of the low crossing, which was a place, a ford where the river ran shallow and where a road crossed that we needed and she would not let us have. Her actual name I learned much later, and I will keep it for the part of the story where it belongs. For most of that autumn she was just the widow, a presence, a reason that the low crossing cost us a soldier or two every time we tried to use it, and never the same way twice. She did not have many people. Perhaps a dozen, perhaps fewer locals who knew the ground in their bones, but she understood something about us that our own commanders did not understand about themselves, that we were a people who needed to know where we stood, that our whole strength was built on order, on the edges of things, on knowing our rank and our position and the procedure. And so she did not fight our strength. She fought our certainty. She made the ground around the low crossing a place where nothing was ever quite where it should be, where the procedure never quite applied, where an officer could never quite say with confidence what the situation was. She gave us doubt the way the city had given our weapon doubt. The humans of Holland's Reach were, I have come to think, a species with an instinct for the soft place in a hard thing, the doubt inside the certainty, and they went for it every time in their weapons and in their enemies and, eventually, in me. I lost soldiers at the low crossing, good ones. Ulrani I had trained, whose ranks I knew, whose deaths I had to file as honorable or as waste. And here is the thing that started the crack widening in me, the small thing, the thing I did not even notice at first. I could not file them as honorable, and I could not file them as waste, because the categories no longer fit. An honorable death is a death in a fight that matters against an enemy that is real. A wasteful death is a death thrown away for nothing. But my soldiers were dying for a river crossing on a cold world against farmers, in a campaign that was supposed to have taken 3 months and was now in its second season, and I could not find the category. The edges of my world, the edges I had loved, the edges that had made me feel safe my whole life, they were starting not to line up with anything. I did not let myself feel that. I want to be honest about the sequence. I did not have a moment of doubt where I questioned the war. I was not capable of that yet. What I had was a low, constant, formless wrongness, a sense that the rhythm I had trusted my whole life was off, and I dealt with it the way a disciplined soldier deals with everything, by working harder, by tightening the procedure, by deciding that the wrongness was a problem of execution and not of the thing itself. If the war felt wrong, it was because we were fighting it badly. The answer was to fight it better. The answer was always, in those days, to do the same thing harder. By the deep of the winter we held the fold, more or less. We held it the way you hold water in your hand. The settlements were counted and pacified, and the smoke still came up from them in the mornings. But it was a different smoke now, the smoke of a people surviving under occupation rather than a people living. We had the low crossing, finally. The widow had gone quiet, pulled back into the hills, and we told ourselves she was beaten, and we were wrong, and some part of me knew we were wrong because I had walked beaten worlds and this was not the texture of one. The cold came down hard. Our suits were not made for it. They were made for the controlled environments of ships and the brief discomforts of a 3-month campaign, not for a winter on a cold world that went on, a winter the humans had built their whole lives around and that we had wandered into like fools. We lost soldiers to the cold, not the enemy. The world itself was killing us slowly, because we had come unprepared into a place its own people had spent generations learning to survive. And that, more than any battle, is the thing that should have told us we had misunderstood everything. The humans were not fighting us alone. The world was on their side because they had earned it, generation by generation, and we were strangers in it, and strangers in a hard place do not last. It was at the very end of that winter in the thaw, when the snow was rotting off the fields, and that wet iron smell came back stronger than ever, the smell of the world waking up, that the morning happened that I told you about at the start. The morning with the man who should have killed me and did not. I have taken a long time getting you here, and I have done it on purpose, because you cannot understand what that man did unless you understand what I was when he did it. A proud, frightened, disciplined creature who had watched a city die and felt the universe come back into order, who could no longer tell an honorable death from a wasteful one, who was losing soldiers to a river and to the cold and to a widow in the hills, and who still, even then, believed that the answer was to do the same thing harder. That is the creature that went up into the hills above the fold in the thaw, chasing the widow of the low crossing, certain that one more push would finish her, certain that the wrongness in the war was a problem of execution. That is the creature that did not come back down the way he went up. But the lamp is still high and you are still listening, and the morning deserves its own telling, slow and whole, the way it happened, every minute of it, because it is the hinge that the rest of my life turns on and I will not rush it. Said another light, this will take a while. The thaw on a cold world is not like the thaw anywhere I had been before. On most worlds spring is gentle. It arrives the way a guest arrives, with some warning, easing in. On Holland's reach the thaw came like a wound opening. The snow that had held the whole landscape rigid for half a year went soft and then went to water all at once, and the ground that had been hard as stone turned to a black sucking mud that pulled the boots off your feet, and every low place in the valleys became a stream, and every stream became loud. That is the thing I remember most about the thaw, the noise. After a winter of that terrible held silence, where even the wind seemed frozen, suddenly the whole world was talking, water running everywhere, ice cracking off the high slopes with sounds like the world breaking, birds I had never heard before coming back from wherever they had been and filling the dawn with a racket that our sensors kept flagging as movement because they could not understand that it was only living things being glad. I hated it, I want to be honest. I hated the thaw because it took away the one advantage the winter had given us, which was that the world had been still enough to watch. In the winter, anything that moved was the enemy, and we could see it move against the white. In the thaw, everything moved. The whole world moved. And the widow of the low crossing, who had gone quiet in the deep cold, came alive again with the water. She started taking us apart almost the day the snow softened. Not in battles. She never gave us a battle, she was far too clever for that. She took us apart the way water takes apart a wall, finding the small weaknesses, working at them, patient, relentless. A patrol that did not come back. A supply track that became impassable in exactly the place where impassable cost us the most. A position that had been safe all winter and was suddenly, one morning, not. She was reading us. She had spent the whole winter watching how we moved and now she was using it. And the worst of it, the thing that got under my plating and stayed there, was that she never wasted anything. Every soldier she took for a reason. Every move cost her almost nothing and cost us more than we could afford. She fought like someone who had done the arithmetic of a hard world her whole life, who knew exactly what a thing cost and would not pay a copper more than it was worth. I became obsessed with her. I will use the human word because it is the right one and I have no better one in my own tongue. I became obsessed. She was the wrongness in the war made into a single person, and if I could only kill her, I told myself, the wrongness would resolve, the rhythm would come back, the edges of the world would line up again the way they were supposed to. I did not think this clearly. If I had thought it clearly, I would have heard how mad it was. But it was under everything I did that spring. The certainty that the widow was the problem and that her death was the solution. And I pursued that certainty up into the hills above the fold, with the focus of a creature who has decided that one more push will fix what is broken in his world. I had her located, or I believed I did. We had intercepted enough of her movement, lost enough patrols in a particular set of high valleys, that I had built a picture of where she sheltered, a settlement up near the tree line that the humans called High Fold, the last and highest of the cold soil settlements, dug into a south slope under a shoulder of bare rock. I was certain she was using it. I was probably right. That is the part that haunts me, that I was probably right, that the operation was probably sound, that everything I did was probably correct by every standard I had ever been taught. I took the best of what was left of my unit up into those hills in the thought to finish her, and I did it well. And being right and doing it well is exactly what walked me into the worst and best morning of my life. We went up in the dark before dawn. The mud was bad, but the cold of the night had firmed it just enough. I remember the smell again, the wet iron and the sweet rot underneath, stronger than ever in the thaw, the whole world breaking down and waking up at once. I remember the water everywhere, the noise of it, and how it covered our movement but also covered theirs, and how I knew that and went anyway because I was certain, and certainty is a kind of deafness. She let us get most of the way up. I understand now that this was the whole of her plan and that she had probably built it weeks before. The moment she understood I was the kind of officer who would come for her personally, who had made her into the war. She let us climb almost to High Fold. She let us get into the steep ground above the tree line where the slopes were bare rock slick with meltwater, and the only paths were the natural lines, the gullies and the shoulders, the places where terrain forces you to go. And she had spent the winter learning every one of those lines. She knew where we would have to be. We did not have to be found. We had to be predicted, and she had predicted us, the way the humans of Holland's Reach predicted everything, by knowing the ground in their bones and knowing us in our certainty. The ambush, when it came, was not loud. That is the thing I tell young soldiers. On the rare occasions any of them will listen to an old enemy. The worst thing that ever happens to you will not announce itself. It came as a single sound, a charge going off below and behind us, in the gully we had just climbed through, and the meaning of that sound reached me a half-second before the rest of it, because I understood instantly that it was not aimed at us. It was aimed at the slope. She did not need to kill us with the charge. She needed to move the mountain, and in the thaw, with the ground soft and the meltwater running and the whole slope held together by nothing but cold that was leaving, moving the mountain was the easiest thing in the world. The slope came down. I have tried many times to describe it and I cannot, not really. There is no describing the moment the ground you are standing on stops being ground. It was not like a battle. In a battle, there is an enemy and you can face the enemy. There is nothing to face when the world itself comes apart under you. I remember being upright, and then I remember not knowing which way was upright. The whole bare rock face of the slope letting go at once. Rock and mud and meltwater and my soldiers and me, all of it moving downward together in a roar that swallowed every other sound. And somewhere in it, the small human sounds of the widow's people, who were not in the slide because they had never been on the part of the slope that moved, who were on the firm ground to the side, finishing what the mountain started. I do not remember being hit. I have been told since by the human who found me that I was struck by rock and probably by fire as well, that there was a wound in my side that was rock and a wound in my leg that was a weapon, and that I should not have lived through either, let alone both at the bottom of a slope that had tried to bury me. I do not remember any of it as pain in the moment. The body protects you from that, I think, in the very worst moments. What I remember is the stopping, the slide stopping, the roar draining out of the world and the water noise coming back, and the bird racket coming back, the world resuming its glad spring talking as though it had not just killed most of a unit of soldiers, and me lying at the bottom of it in the black mud with the sky very far away and gray, and a certainty draining out of me along with the noise. The certainty that I was the kind of officer who would finish this. The certainty that one more push would fix the war. The certainty that the edges of the world lined up, all of it draining out into the mud with what I assumed was the last of my life. And then the worst part, the part I had done to others and never once thought about, because to me it was simply procedure, simply the correct allocation of resources, simply efficiency. My own people left me. I heard them, that is the thing. I was conscious enough to hear them, the survivors of my unit, regrouping on the firm ground above, the Ulrani voices, the procedure being followed, the count being taken, the decision being made. And the decision was the decision I would have made. The decision I had made more than once on other worlds about other soldiers. The wounded who cannot move themselves are a cost. To recover them under threat is to risk the whole for the part, and the whole is always worth more than the part. That is the first arithmetic of the conquered. That is the math the machine runs on. They counted me among the dead because counting me among the dead was cheaper than the truth, and they pulled back in good order by the procedure, leaving their officer in the mud below a slope because recovering him was not worth the risk. I heard the decision made in my own language by soldiers I had trained, and I understood it completely, and I could not even be angry. Because it was correct, it was what I had built them to do, it was what I was. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it is the thing that emptied me out and made room for what came next. I had spent my whole life inside the order of my people, loving its edges, feeling safe inside its arithmetic. And in the worst moment of my life, that order looked at me, did the arithmetic, and correctly decided I was not worth the cost. The thing I had loved and served and believed in my whole life did the only thing it could do and abandoned me to die in the mud of a world I never should have come to. And the terrible part, the part I have never quite recovered from, is that I could not even fault it. It was right. By everything I had ever believed, it was right to leave me. So I lay there. I made my peace, as much as a creature like I was then could make peace, which is to say I stopped expecting to live and I waited for the cold to do its work, because the cold had been killing us all winter and now it would kill me too, and there was a kind of order in that, at least, a last edge to hold on to. I lay in the black mud and watched the gray sky and listened to the world being glad, and I waited to stop. That is when the human came down the slope. I heard him before I saw him, the way you hear something coming through the mud and meltwater, the careful sounds of someone descending broken ground who knows the ground and does not want to start it sliding again. I could not turn my head much. I got the sky and a band of broken slope, and then, into the band of broken slope, the shape of a human, picking his way down toward me. And I understood what this was. This was the part where the enemy comes to confirm the kill to make certain, the cold last task after a fight. I had done it. We all had done it. You go down among the fallen enemy and you make certain. It is not cruelty. It is procedure. I expected procedure. I almost welcomed it. A weapon would be faster than the cold. He reached me and he crouched down, and I saw his face for the first time. He was young. I did not know enough about humans yet to read their ages well, but I learned later he was 19 of their years, which is barely grown, barely out of childhood by their reckoning, though on a hard world childhood ends early. His name was Eli Brandt. I will say his whole name as often as I can in the telling, because for a very long time no one said it, because he was no one to the histories, a farm boy from a cold soil settlement, and the histories do not record farm boys. They record fleets and battles and the great movements of the machine. They do not record the morning a 19-year-old human knelt down in the mud beside the enemy officer who had taken the low crossing and killed his neighbors and made the war into a person, and decided not to make certain. He had a weapon, I saw it. A human hunting weapon, the kind they had used to take us apart all winter. He had it, and he had every reason to use it, and I waited for him to use it, and he did not. What he did instead I did not understand for a long time because it was so far outside my arithmetic that my mind had nowhere to put it. He looked at me. He looked at the wound in my side and the wound in my leg. And his face did a thing that I had no name for, a thing I had never once seen on the face of an enemy or, I think, on the face of any of my own people. It was not triumph. It was not hatred. It was not even mercy, not yet, not the decision part of it. It was something simpler and stranger that came before the decision. It was the face of someone seeing a living thing in pain and being unable, at the level of the body before any thought, to be glad of it. He saw me hurt in some part of him, some old deep human part older than the war and older than sides, simply could not stand it. I watched the war drain out of his face the way the certainty had drained out of me, and what was left underneath, when the war was gone, was a 19-year-old looking at something hurt and wanting, helplessly, against every reason to help. He set the weapon down. I have replayed that single action 10,000 times across the rest of my life. He set the weapon down in the mud, where it could not be quickly picked up, where setting it down made him vulnerable to me, the enemy, the officer, the one who had done all the things I had done. He made himself vulnerable to me in order to put his hands on my wounds, and then he did exactly that. He put his hands on the wound in my side, those strange, short, five-fingered human hands, and he pressed, the way you press to stop bleeding, and he said something to me. I did not have his language then. I learned it later well enough, and I have spent a long time being almost certain I have reconstructed what he said, though I will never be sure. I believe he said, "Okay, I've got you, hold on," which are nothing words. Which are the words you say to anything hurt, an animal, a child, a stranger, an enemy. They mean nothing, and they mean the whole of what I am trying to tell you tonight. I've got you, hold on, to me, the officer who had made the war. I've got you. I should tell you what I felt, and I cannot, because what I felt was not a feeling I had a category for, any more than I had a category for an honorable death that was also a waste. The whole architecture of my life was built on edges, on knowing where I stood, on the arithmetic of cost and worth. And here was a creature who, by my arithmetic, should kill me, who had every reason and right to kill me, who would be a fool not to kill me, and who was instead pressing his bare hands into my wound and telling me to hold on at risk to himself, for no gain, against every reason, because some part of him could not do otherwise. There was no place in my world for that. It did not compute as mercy, because mercy in my world was a transaction, a thing the strong granted the weak from a position of safety to demonstrate the strength. This was not that. He was not safe. He gained nothing. There was no demonstration in it because there was no one to demonstrate to. It was dawn on a broken slope, and there was only him and me and the wound. He was helping me for the single reason that I was hurt, and he was the one who was there. And that reason, which was no reason at all by my arithmetic, turned out to be the strongest force I ever encountered, stronger than the conquered, stronger than 60 species and 1,000 years of conquest, strong enough in the end to bring the whole machine down. But I am ahead again. The old man's curse. Let me stay in the morning because the morning is not over, and what happened next is the part the human histories really do not record, because none of them were there to see it, only me and the widow. Because the widow came down the slope too. I heard her before he did, I think, because he was focused on the wound. I heard the careful descent of someone else who knew the ground, and I felt Eli Brandt go still over me, his hand still pressed to my side, and I understood that whatever was about to happen, he had not planned it, that he had come down to a wounded enemy on his own decision, and that this other arrival was not his and might undo everything. And then she came into the band of sky I could see, and I knew her, though I had never seen her face. I knew her the way you know a thing you have spent a season afraid of, the widow of the low crossing. She had a weapon too, and unlike the boy, she did not set it down. She looked at the wounded enemy officer in the mud. She looked at the boy with his bare hands pressed into the enemy's wound. And I watched a thing happen between them, a human thing that I understood even without the language, because some things you understand below language. She was older. She had the authority of someone the boy answered to. And every line of her said the obvious, the correct, the only sane thing. That this was the enemy, that this was the officer, that this was the one who had made the war into a person, and that the boy should take his hands off the wound and pick up the weapon he had set down and finish what the slope had started. Every reason in the world was on her side. The arithmetic was entirely hers. And the boy did not move his hands. He looked up at her from where he knelt over me and he said something, and again I have spent a lifetime reconstructing it, and I believe that what he said was very short, that it was something like, "He's hurt." Just that. Not an argument, not a justification, just the fact that had reached him below all the reasons. He's hurt, as though that settled it. As though, in a world of arithmetic and edges and cost and worth, the single fact that a thing was hurt and you were the one who was there could simply settle it, could outweigh the whole machine, could be enough. And here is the part I have carried longest, the part I keep on the shelf in the small, ugly object you keep asking about. The widow of the low crossing, who had spent a winter taking my people apart with the patience of water, who had buried most of my unit under a mountain not an hour before, who had every reason and right and arithmetic on her side to put an end to me. The widow looked at the boy with his bare hands in the enemy's wound, and she looked at me, the enemy, helpless and emptied out in the mud, and something in her face did the same thing the boys had done. The war drained out of it. And underneath the war there was a tired old human woman on a hard world who had lost more than I would ever know, and who was, against everything, looking at a hurt thing and unable to be glad of it. She did not help me. I will not make her into something she was not. She did not kneel down beside the boy and put her hands in my wound. She had buried my soldiers, and she would have buried me without losing a night's sleep if I had been a threat. But I was not a threat anymore. I was a hurt thing in the mud. And she lowered the weapon slowly, and she said something to the boy, and her voice when she said it was not the voice of a commander. It was the voice of someone conceding something to a part of herself she had thought the war had killed. I learned much later what she said. The boy told me, years later in the quiet, when we could finally talk about that morning without it costing us too much. She said, "Then we carry him." That was the moment the war began to end. Not in a battle, not in a fleet action or a great human ferocity that threw the conquered back. It began to end on a broken slope in the thaw, when an old woman who had every reason to kill me looked at a boy who would not take his hands off my wound, and instead of telling him to stop, she bent down to lift the other end of me. Two humans, the youngest and the oldest of the enemy, the most innocent and the most hardened, agreeing without a single shared reason between them that the hurt thing in the mud would not be left to die. Because that, I came to understand across the rest of my long life, is the thing my people never understood about humanity, the thing the conquered could not bomb from a great height or pacify in the fold or predict in its certainty. That underneath all their disorder and their stubbornness and their terrible practical relentlessness, there was a thing that was not practical at all, a thing that made no arithmetic sense, a thing that would lift the enemy out of the mud for no reason but that he was hurt and they were there. And you cannot conquer a people who will do that. You cannot even understand them. We had come to teach them the stillness of the defeated, and instead two of them taught me, in the mud, in the thaw, the thing that finished us. That there is a kind of strength that has nothing to do with edges, and a kind of order that has nothing to do with arithmetic, and that we, for all our symmetry, had never once possessed it. They carried me up out of that slope. I do not remember much of it. I was going in and out by then, the wounds and the cold finally reaching me now that I had been given a reason to feel them, which is its own cruelty, that hope brings back the pain. I remember being lifted. The boy at my shoulders, the old woman at my legs, two enemies straining up a broken slope with the weight of the officer who had made their war. I remember the gray sky swinging above me. I remember the bird racket. I remember the wet iron smell, very close now, because my face was near the boy's hands and his hands smelled of the world, of earth and water and the cold soil farm he had come from. I remember thinking, in the last clear thought before I went under, that I did not understand anything, that everything I had known was wrong, that the edges of the world had not lined up after all and never would again, and that I was, for the first time in my life, completely and utterly lost, and that being lost, here, in the arms of my enemies who would not let me die, was the closest thing to safe I had ever felt. Then I went under, and the morning ended, and the rest of my life began. I will tell you what they did with me, and how it spread, and how a thing that started on one broken slope became the doubt that ran through the whole conquered like the humans had run doubt through our weapon over Karen. I will tell you who the widow of the low crossing really was, because she had a name, and the name matters, and it is bound up with the boy's name in a way I did not learn until much later, and that broke something open in me when I did. And I will tell you about the small, ugly object on the shelf, and why I keep it, and why you may hold it before this night is over after all. But pour the water first. My throat is old and the story is not done, and the part that is coming is the part where I have to tell you what I learned, and the learning is the hardest part to say out loud, even now, even after all this time. I woke up in a place I did not understand, and the not understanding was the beginning of everything I became. It was warm. That is the first thing. After a whole winter of cold that had been killing my people one soldier at a time, after lying in the black mud waiting for that cold to finish me, I woke up warm, and the warmth was so strange to my body that for a long while I did not believe it. I was in a low room dug into a slope, the way the cold soil humans built, with thick walls of earth and stone that held the heat, and there was a fire, a small human cooking and heating fire, and the air smelled of wood smoke and the wet iron world outside, and underneath, the warm animal smell of humans living close together. I was wrapped in something. My wounds were bound. Bound not by my own people, who had left me, but by the hands of the enemy, who had carried me up a mountain for no reason that made sense. I did not understand why I was alive. I lay there and I worked at it the way you work at a problem that has no solution in the mathematics you know. By every arithmetic I possessed, I should be dead. I was a captured enemy officer, wounded, helpless, worth nothing, a cost with no return. The correct thing, the thing my own people had done, the thing I would have done was to leave me, or to finish me, and instead I was warm and bound and alive in the home of the people I had come to conquer. There was no place in my world for it. I kept reaching for the arithmetic, and the arithmetic kept not being there, like reaching for a step in the dark that turns out not to exist, that lurch in the body when the world is not shaped the way you were certain it was shaped. The boy was there when I woke, Eli Brandt. He was sitting by the fire mending something, because that is what they did, those people, in every spare moment. They kept things alive, fences and tools and machines, and it turned out enemies. He saw I was awake and he came over, and he was careful and a little afraid, I think, because I was large and gray and strange and I had made the war, but he came over anyway. And he did the thing again. He looked at me the way he had looked at me on the slope, that face from before the war, and he said something, and I did not have the language yet, but I understood the shape of it. He was asking if I was in pain. The enemy. Asking the enemy if he was in pain. I learned their language that spring in that warm room faster than I would have believed possible, because I had a powerful reason to. I wanted to understand. Not strategically. I had stopped, somewhere on that slope, being the creature who understood things strategically. I wanted to understand because I had encountered something my whole life had not prepared me for, and I could not rest until I had words for it. And the first thing I came to understand, once I had enough of their language, was who the widow of the low crossing actually was. Her name was Mara Brandt. You see it now. You have seen it for a moment, I think, the way the name sits beside the boys. Mara Brandt. She was not a legend or a force or the wrongness in the war made into a person. She was a farmer on a hard world who had buried a husband to the cold 2 winters before we ever came, and who had buried, that same winter we arrived, an elder son, her firstborn, a young man named Tomas, killed in the first fighting over the very water that started the whole thing, the pumping station, the thing that fed 3 settlements through the long winter. She had lost a husband and a son, and she had 1 child left in the whole world, and his name was Eli, and he was 19, and he was everything she had. That is who the widow of the low crossing was. A mother with 1 child left, who had taken her grief and her terror of losing the last thing she loved and turned it, with that terrible human practicality, into a war that cost us everything and cost her almost nothing, because she had already lost almost everything there was to lose. I had spent a season afraid of a legend, and the legend was a grieving mother protecting her last son. When I understood that, something broke open in me that has never closed. Because here is the thing I had to sit with, in that warm room, mending slowly while the boy mended his tools. This woman had every reason to kill me that any creature has ever had. I was the enemy. I was the officer. I had come to her world to teach it the stillness of the defeated. My people had killed her firstborn over a water pump. And on that slope, when her 1 remaining child knelt over me with his bare hands in my wound and would not take them away, she did not do the thing her grief demanded. She did not let me die or finish me and use my death to protect her son from the danger of caring for an enemy. She did the opposite. She bent down and lifted the other end of me. And it took me years to understand why, and when I finally understood it, the boy himself explained it to me, and I will give it to you the way he gave it to me, because I cannot improve on it. He said, she didn't carry you for you, she carried you for me. If she'd made me stop, if she'd made me leave you or watch her finish you, then the war would have taken the last of her sons too. Not my body, the other part. The part that couldn't leave a hurt thing in the mud. She'd already lost Tomas to it. She wasn't going to lose me to it as well. Do you understand what that means? Let me say it plainly, because it is the center of everything, the thing the whole long night has been walking toward. Mara Brandt carried the enemy who symbolized everything she had lost, up a mountain in her grief, because the alternative was to let the war turn her last living child into the kind of creature who could leave a hurt thing to die. And she had decided, this grieving, hardened, relentless woman had decided, somewhere down in the part of her the war had not reached, that she would lose anything, give anything, carry any weight before she would lose that, before she would let us make her son into one of us, into one of me. We thought we had come to conquer them. We had not understood that the thing we would have had to destroy in order to conquer them was the very thing they would die before they would let go of. You cannot defeat a people whose deepest line in the sand is not their cities or their lives, but their refusal to become cruel. There is no strike from a great height that reaches that. There is no arithmetic that touches it. We had brought 1,000 years of conquest against a mother who would carry her enemy uphill, rather than let her child learn to leave the hurt to die. And we never had the smallest chance, and we did not even know it. Now I will tell you how it spread, because a single morning on a single slope does not end an empire, however much I felt it had ended my own small certainty. What ended the empire was that the morning was not unique. That is the part that should frighten you, if you ever find yourself on the conquering end of anything. The humans of Holland's Reach did not treat me as they did because I was special. They treated me as they did because that is simply what they were. All across that cold world, wherever the fighting threw up a wounded or captured conquered soldier into human hands, The same impossible arithmetic kept producing the same impossible result. They kept us alive. They bound our wounds. They fed us from stores they could barely spare on a hard world in a long winter. Not all of them, not always, not perfectly. They were not saints, and I will not make them into saints. There was cruelty too. There is always cruelty. But enough of them, often enough, did the thing Eli Brandt did, that a pattern formed, and the pattern got back into the conquered, and the pattern was poison to us in a way no weapon could have been. Because think of what we were. We were a machine that ran on certainty, on every soldier knowing exactly where he stood, exactly what the enemy was, exactly what the arithmetic required. Our whole strength was the strength of a wall of edges that lined up, of a creature who is safe because he knows his rank and his procedure and the worth of every death. And the humans found the soft place in that, the way they had found the soft place in our weapon over Karen, the way Mara Brandt had found the soft place in my certainty in the hills. They did it not with a strategy but with their nature. They sent us back. That was the thing. They sent the spared soldiers back. A captured, conquered soldier, healed, fed, treated as a person by the enemy he had come to conquer, and then released, returned across the lines to his own people. And what does that soldier carry back? Not intelligence, not a weapon. He carries back doubt. He carries back the impossible fact that the enemy looked at him hurt and helpless and chose to keep him alive for no reason but that he was hurt. And that fact sits in the soldier like the doubt the humans put in our weapon, and it cannot be removed because it is true. And once it is in him, he can never again be fully certain. And a soldier of the conquered who is not fully certain is a soldier who has already, in the only way that matters, stopped being one of us. It spread the way water spreads, the way Mara Brandt fought, patient, relentless, finding the small weaknesses, costing them almost nothing and costing us more than we could afford. The campaign that was meant to take 3 months was in its second year, and then its third, and across those years the doubt ran through the ranks faster than any human weapon ever could have, soldier to soldier, the spared ones and the ones who heard about the spared ones, until whole units could not be relied upon to take ground because the soldiers had stopped being able to believe in the thing that made them soldiers. The conquered did not lose Holland's reach in a great battle. The human histories won a great battle and there was not one. The conquered lost Holland's reach the way a wall loses to water, not in a moment, not to a blow, but slowly, from inside, as the certainty it was built from dissolved, soldier by soldier, doubt by doubt, mercy by impossible mercy, until one day the machine looked at the cost of going on and could not find a single soldier left who believed the arithmetic, and it withdrew. We told ourselves it was a strategic reallocation. It was a rout of the spirit dressed up as a decision of the mind. We left that cold world the way I had lain in the mud, emptied out, the certainty drained away, lost in a universe that was not the shape we had been so sure of. And the thing about a doubt like that is that it does not stay on one world. The soldiers who carried it went to other worlds, other campaigns, and they carried it with them, and they spread it the way they had caught it. And within a generation, the machine that had swallowed 60 species over 1,000 years could no longer make its soldiers believe. And a machine of conquest that cannot make its soldiers believe is already a ruin, however many ships it still has. The conquered did not fall in a war. It fell in the slow understanding, spreading mind to mind across 100 worlds, that the humans had been right and we had been wrong, that there was a kind of strength we did not possess and could not bomb and could not predict, and that we had spent 1,000 years mistaking the absence of that strength in ourselves for the presence of something better. The quiet you grew up in, the quiet you think is the natural state of the galaxy, that quiet is the silence of a machine that finally stopped, because a farm boy on a cold world knelt down in the mud and would not take his hands off an enemy's wound, and his grieving mother chose to carry the enemy rather than let the war take the last of her sons. I did not go back. I think you have understood that by now. There was nowhere to go back to. The creature who could have gone back had drained out of me on the slope, and what was left did not fit the machine anymore. I stayed. I lived the rest of my life among them, the people I had come to conquer in the quiet after, and it was a strange life and a good one, and I will not bore you with the whole of it because the whole of it is not the story. The story is the morning, and what the morning taught, and the only thing left to tell is the thing on the shelf. Bring it here, yes, you may hold it now, the story has earned it. It is ugly, I know. It is a small battered metal thing, a human tool, a folding thing with worn edges and a handle smoothed down by use until you can see where a thumb rested on it across a lifetime. It is not a weapon. I want you to understand that before anything else. It is the opposite of a weapon. It is a tool for fixing. For mending fences and machines and the thousand stubborn broken things on a hard world that a people kept alive through cleverness and patience, and a refusal to accept that a thing had only one way to behave. It was Eli Brandt's. He carried it his whole life. He was carrying it the morning he came down the slope. It was in his pocket while his bare hands were in my wound. He used it, that spring in the warm room, to mend his tools while I learned his language and tried to understand why I was alive. And he used it for the next 60 years, because he lived a long human life, longer than most on that hard world, and we were friends for the whole of it. The boy who would not take his hands off the wound and the officer who had made the war, and that friendship is the truest thing I have ever known, and it is also not the story, so I will only say that it happened and that I was grateful for every year of it. He gave it to me before he died. He was very old by then, old the way humans get, which is different from how we get old, more sudden somehow, more frail. He pressed it into my hand, those same short five-fingered human hands, weaker now but the same hands, and he said the thing he had said on the slope, the nothing words that are the whole of everything. He said, "Hold on," and I have held on. 60 years he kept that tool, fixing the broken things of a hard world, keeping alive what wanted to die. And then he gave it to the enemy he had once kept alive, and told him to hold on, and I have held on, and now I am giving it to you. No, do not say anything yet. Let me finish, because this is the last of it, and I have waited a long time to say it to the right person, and you are the right person because you are Eli Brandt's blood, his great-granddaughter. You did not know the whole of this story. Your family kept a piece of it. That old Tomas's brother once saved an alien in the war, but they did not keep the whole, because Eli never told the whole, because the whole was too large to carry around in an ordinary life, and so he left it with me, the one other person who was on that slope, to give to you tonight. That is why I asked you here. That is why I have made you sit through an old creature's whole long telling, so that you would understand the thing in your hand before you held it. So that it would be more than an ugly old tool, so that you would know that you come from people who carry the hurt thing uphill. That is your inheritance, not the tool, what the tool means. The refusal, down in the part of you the world cannot reach, to leave a hurt thing in the mud. I am the last one who remembers the morning. When I am gone there will be no one alive who was on that slope, and the morning will become history, and history does not record farm boys. And so the only place the truth of it will live is in you, in your hands, in the tool and what the tool means. Keep it. Keep it ugly and worn and useless as a weapon, because that is the point of it. And when you are old, give it to your own blood and tell them the whole, the way I have told you, slow and entire, so it is never reduced to a battle that did not happen. There, the lamp is almost down. We have made it to the end of the night, you and I, and the story is told, the whole of it, every minute of the morning that my long life turns on. They keep asking me why I lived when better soldiers than me did not. I told you I had stopped giving the easy answer. Here is the real one, the only one, the one I have spent a whole night earning the right to say. I lived because a hurt thing in the mud is still a thing, and the people I came to destroy could not unsee that. Not in their weapons and not in their soldiers and not in the end in me. We brought 1,000 years of certainty against a single morning of mercy, and the mercy won, and it did not even have to try. So when they ask me why I lived, I tell them the truth. I lived because somebody's hands were warmer than the war. That is the whole of it. That is everything I know. Hold on to it. Hold on.